Thank you, sir. Good morning to you, neighbors. I'm delighted to be here with you on this good, what is this, Tuesday? Monday, isn't it? Monday morning? Boy, I don't know. You can tell how much sleep I had. Dr. Robertson called me Saturday morning. I was getting ready to leave for Anderson, Indiana, up beyond Indianapolis. And he asked if I would come and speak here this morning. And so I said yes. I got back from Indianapolis, and then I think I went to sleep. I don't know. And then got here. This morning, actually, I did get some sleep. About 5 o'clock, 4:30, I guess it was this morning, my hound dog came and knocked on the door. And his name is Murphy. He's a fat slob. He's a basset, and he's got big ears and a loud mouth and a big stomach, a big appetite, and and he's got big affection. He doesn't have much sense, but he's a friend of mine. He came and started banging on the door and barking. So got up and opened the sliding door, and he came in, and the tomcat came in with him, and so I don't know. That was the end of rest around my house this morning, and I got up and went on to the office and did a little work. Came on down here. I was in Anderson, Indiana last week. I was someplace, Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I don't know where I was last week, and I heard something. People come around to me and say, "I remember you." A lady said to me, "I remember when you were in Dallas, Texas, just a barefoot boy running around the streets of Dallas." The fact is, I was 19 years old before I ever saw Dallas, and I was wearing cowboy boots. I was decently dressed. I was not, but anyway. But the other day a man came in and said, "I remember the Bill Rice Ranch. I was there one of the first years." He said, "I remember how we had steak every day." Oh boy, oh boy. If you come to the Bill Rice Ranch and we do give you cowboy gravy. That's the nearest thing to steak. But anyway, but here's the wild thing. He said, "I remember Lee Robertson. I remember the closing night, what a great service, and he preached for 2 hours." Now, I'll tell you, I have never heard him preach more than 30 minutes. And so I didn't know he had ever preached 2 hours at my place. But that's what he said. "I remember a great service and how Dr. Robertson preached for more than 2 hours." And so, all right, maybe he did. Now, I was just thinking this morning, it's only fair that I do the same thing here that he did. Will you turn, please, to 1 Kings 19. 1 Kings 19. I like this place. You know what? I like everybody here, except for I have one niece who's mean, and I have trouble with her. She's a smart aleck and writes me letters, but except for that, I like everybody at this college. I have loved for years Dr. Robertson and J.R. Faulkner and Dr. Cliff and the good folks here. This is home to me. I love being here, and I'm so glad y'all are here. And if this is your first time, well, I'm so glad somebody invited you to come. I'm glad you're here. This morning, let me talk to you a little while about Elisha and the mantle of Elijah. Will you bow for prayer? Our Father, we pray your blessing upon the reading and preaching of the Bible this morning. Now, Lord, speak to hearts. Change lives for Jesus' sake. Amen. 1 Kings 19:19. So he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him. 24 oxen. Good night. 12 of them. 12 yoke. And let me put on my glasses here. He was the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, and then I'll follow thee." And he said unto him, "Go back again, for what have I done to thee?" he returned back from him and took a yoke of oxen and slew them and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen. He took the harness and the yokes and so on, made a fire and used that, and gave unto the people, and they did eat. Then he arose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. A little later we read that he is called the man who poured water on the hands of Elijah. Then, if you'll turn to 2 Kings now, 2 Kings chapter 2. It came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah unto heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said unto Elisha, Tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel. Elisha said unto him, As the Lord liveth, as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they went down to Bethel. The sons of the prophets that were at Bethel came forth to Elisha, and said, Knowest thou the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And he said, Yes, I know it. Hold ye your peace. Then Elijah said, Well, let's go to Jericho. Same thing. Let's go to Jordan. Same thing. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to Jordan. So am I. Elisha said, I'm not going to leave you. Well, don't you know that I'm going to go to heaven today? Yes, I do. Well, then, goodbye. Goodbye, nothing. I'm going to be with you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to stick close to you. I'll be here. Then they went ahead, and Elijah said, look, verse 9, it came to pass when they were going over, Elijah said unto Elisha, Ask what I shall do for thee before I'm taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. He said, You've asked a hard thing, but if you're with me when I'm taken up, okay. And it came to pass, verse 11, as they went and talked, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and separated them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind to him. Elisha said, I'm going to stay with you. How close? So close. The Lord kept saying, Now I got a whirlwind going. I want to get Elijah, but great guns, I'm going to have to get both of them if I don't watch it. And finally, God said, Hey, send a chariot of fire. And here they came at him, and one man jumped one way and one the other. And the Lord said, Quick, while they're separated, grab Elijah. Here he went. Elisha saw it, and he cried, My father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. He saw him no more. He never saw Elijah. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. He took up the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood by the bank of the Jordan. They had just come across the Jordan. Elijah had made the waters part. Now Elisha took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and smote the waters and said, Where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he also had smitten the waters, they parted to the one side to the other, and Elisha went over. Elijah came by, and Elisha was plowing 12 yoke of oxen, 2 horses in a team, 2 mules in a span, 2 oxen in a yoke, 12 yoke, 24. Elijah came by, took his mantle, threw it over Elisha, kept on. Elisha came after him and said, Hey, wait a minute. You want me to follow you? He said, Look, up to you. I'm not the Lord. I'm not your boss. Well, he said, Look, let me go back and kiss my mother and father. They're old. Let me go back and take care of them. And he said, Well, man, I'm not holding you. I'm not dragging you with me. Elijah went on, and Elisha went back. Killed oxen. Made a fire with the harness. He wasn't going to use it anymore. Made a fire, fed the people, and then came to follow Elijah. Neighbor, listen. He said later on, I want a double portion of your power. He said, I want what Elijah has. Elijah's a man of God, a prophet of God. Here's a man that prays that the rain will be held and it won't rain, and he prays for rain and the rain comes. Here's a man that calls down the fire from heaven on the mountain. This is the man that God pays attention when he speaks, and men Pay attention. And he said, I want to be another Elijah. I want to have a work for God. I want to do something. You know what? He's a busy man already. God uses busy people. There was a young man named Gideon. What was he doing? At the wine press. He was out threshing the wheat, the grain. And God called him and said, I want you to come on, and one day you'll lead the armies of Israel. God picked him. Busy man. God was looking for a king. Samuel was looking for a man who would be the first king of Israel. Who? Young Saul, out taking care of his father's donkeys. The man anointed king after Saul, young David. Here were the other sons of Jesse. Where's the baby boy? He is out working. He's taking care of the father's sheep. He's the one. God uses busy men. Philip, preaching a great revival in Samaria. And the angel of the Lord came and took Philip and brought him down to Gaza, desert, to talk to the Ethiopian eunuch. James and John, the sons of thunder, were fishing. And Jesus called them, and they left their nets and their father. Followed Jesus. Peter and Andrew fishing. Jesus said, follow me. They left their boats. Matthew sitting at the seat of custom, busy. Lydia, a seller of purple. Hey, look, God uses people who work. He uses busy people. Elisha said, but wait, I have my mother and my father, and let me go kiss them. Let me take care of them. And Elijah said, well, do what you want. But God said, hey, Elisha. And he said, yes, sir. And he said, get going. Oh. And so God did something that Elijah did not. I'm sure Elijah inferred it. Elisha, look, you want to be an Elijah? Okay, then you'd better have a singleness of purpose. You'd better decide whether you want to stay here and run a great big farm, and when your mother and father die and you inherit the whole thing, and you stay here, you've got a good living, you're respected, you're wealthy. You want to do that? Or do you want to cast your lot with a man like Elijah and be his servant and wait on him? What are you going to do? Well, shouldn't a man take care of his mother and father? Yes. Yes, he should. Years ago, the father of D.L. Moody died when Moody was just a little boy. His mother, a young woman, a widow, Northfield, Massachusetts, wintertime, bitter cold weather. It gets away, but man, when it's warm, it's below zero. And the widow, the children, no money, food, everything in real trouble. Husband died. There was a man named Elisha, Ezra Purple. He had been selling them the farm, and because of a homestead law, he couldn't take it away from them. He came to the widow. She had no money. Her husband had just been buried. She was distraught, broken-hearted, grieving. Well, he said, you got something you can give me? She said, I don't have a penny. I don't have any money. I don't have anything. Okay. He pulled his wagon out behind the house. He said, at least you've got some wood in the woodshed. He took every stick of kindling, every piece of firewood, put it in his wagon, drove off across the ice and snow, left a widow, and I believe it's 7 little children in an old farmhouse with the wind whistling and the cold weather, purple, heartless. Purple was not a saved man. His son was not saved. His son's family, his children were none saved. His grandchildren, none of them saved. His great-grandchildren, not a one saved until 5 years ago. A man named Carl Purple turned to Christ. He was saved. He and his wife. Then his 2 boys. One boy studying for the ministry in Jack Wurtson's school. Purple some way got a hold of something I'd written. Came down last year about this time to work on the ranch for 2 weeks. He has his own contracting business. This year he came for 2 months. He spent 2 months with us wiring our new administration building and doing contracting work, electrical work, and so on. Came to work. He asked me about him coming to the ranch and working with us full time, and I said, I'd like to have you. We'll make you our construction foreman. And he said, well, I want to do it. I think God would be pleased. And yet he said, my mother is old. My mother's about 90, I think it is. My mother's old. My father's dead. My mother's old. And he said, I don't know if it'd be right. And I said, Elisha left his parents, they must have been getting along in years, to follow the leading of the Lord. If a man, the Bible says, puts his hand to the plow and turns back. Young man said to Jesus, let me go first and bury my father. Let me save my dad till he dies. And Jesus said, no, follow me now. And I said to Mr. Purple, I feel sympathetic. And I think a man ought to take care of his mother and take care of his father, and I think that's right. But I said, the Bible doesn't say you can't make a home for your mother in Middle Tennessee the same as you can in Massachusetts. Back in the choir behind me, there's a young lady whose dad has been one of my best friends for many years, Dr. Billy Renstrom. Dr. Renstrom was blind 31 years and received his sight last September the 2nd, I declare. Oh my, Billy Renstrom. He's been working as a soloist, song leader, and he's soloist on our revival team, and one of the best friends I've had in my whole life. We've worked together now, I think it's 16 years. But I remember when Bill decided, I said you ought to come to the Bill Rice Ranch. It'd save a whole lot of flying back and forth and meeting here and there, and you ought to just move to the ranch. And he said, my wife's mother, Mrs. Harwood, has lived with us. Her father was a well-known evangelist and educator. Mrs. Harwood made their home with the Renstrom for years. Mrs. Renstrom and Dr. Renstrom talked with me and said, well, what about my mother? And I said to them, look, I'm not heartless. But her ministry is over, and yours hadn't even begun. And you can make a living for her in Tennessee as easily as you can in Colorado. And they said, that's right. And they moved to Tennessee, built a special room in the house for her. She came, she died this past year. She came, lived with them some, lived with other people, went back and forth, but they had a room. They took care of her, always welcome. Look, neighbor, Elisha said, there are other things. What about an inheritance? Inheritance, that's good. That's fine. But I tell you what, nothing in this world, not kinfolks, not family, not your inheritance, nothing takes the place of just saying, here am I, send me. Dear Lord, I'll follow you. I'll go where you say. I'll do what you want. Nothing will take the place of that. We had a young man come to the Bill Rice Ranch to learn sign language. He was a gifted man. He learned it quickly, and he was good at it. He was smart. He was a university graduate. He was fine. Working with the deaf. He went back home. His father, a wealthy man, and had a big plumbing business, and said to the boy, don't be a fool. Look, after you've made your money, then you can think about working with the deaf. But right now, be here with me. Be my partner. I'm going to leave the whole thing to you. If you'll come and join me, be my partner right now. I saw the young man later, and he said, Dr. Bill, I know I should work with the deaf. But he said, after all, how many fellows get a chance like this? How many young men have a chance to be rich before they're in their 30s? So he said, you can understand this. I just couldn't turn it down. And I said, no, I can't understand it. But he said, you don't think I should pass by a thing like this? And I said, of course I think you should have passed by a thing like this if it stands between you and God. I remember a man who works with the deaf. He still does. He's now not old, but he's no longer young. A man who said to me, I am paying for a business and this will support me. And I'm going to work with the deaf. And this man, his parents were deaf and he knew sign language and so on. And he and his wife were gifted with sign language and working with the deaf. And he said, as soon as I get my business paid out, it'll support me. And then he said, I'll work for the Lord full time. And he said, right now I can't afford to. And I said, wait a minute. On the Bill Rice Ranch, we have a bunch of houses on the ranch. Everybody, we have 40 on our payroll right now. Everybody who works for the ranch, we can furnish them a home, among other things. And I said, we've got a house. I'll give you a house. I'll pay the bills on it. You can eat at the ranch table. And I'll give the first $100 a month. And come on and work with the deaf full time. And he said, would you do that for me? And I said, I'd do it for Christ. Boy, he said to me, I don't say I can turn this down. But 2 days later he came and said, well, I just can't. He said, I've thought about the business, and my business is going to bring in a whole lot after I get it going. That was 18 or 19 years ago, and his business isn't going yet. Good neighbor, listen. Elisha said, I'll leave behind my parents. I will leave behind my inheritance. I'll leave behind everything else. I will go, and I'll be a servant to Elijah. Who is this? This is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who pours water on the hands of Elijah. Well, I'll declare. You mean you're going to be his servant? Yeah, that's what I mean. Just like Timothy said, I'll be with Paul. I'll be for him. Many years when D.L. Moody was in his prime, he met a young fella, university, Princeton was it, young university graduate named James M. Gray. Gray was greatly impressed with Moody. Moody was uneducated. I read some letters of Moody's. He went to the 3rd grade in school, but you wouldn't believe that to read his letters. I read a letter he wrote to his mother. He said, I went to a fire last night, F-A-R, fire. The police were there, P-O-L-U-S. The police were there. And Gray was horrified at what he considered to be the uncouth language of Moody, but he loved what he was doing. One day Moody got off a train in Chicago, rushed to the Institute, had to leave again in a couple of hours. He said to R.A. Torrey, I've got to talk with you, Torrey. He said to Dr. Gray, he said, Jim, I've got some dirty clothes in that suitcase. Said, get them to a laundry and get them back here in 2 hours, will you? Hurry up. And he said, Reuben, come on. And they went in the other office. Torrey came back out in a moment, and Gray was standing there. He was indignant. He was angry. And there was the suitcase on the floor, and he said, I'm no man's lackey. I'm no lackey. Let him get a servant to take care of his dirty clothes. And Reuben A. Torrey said to him, Jim, D.L. Moody, not because of Moody, but because he can do something I cannot do. And the way God's using him. And he said, look, if he asked me to wash his feet or wash his clothes, I'd do it in a minute. And young Gray picked up the suitcase, went to Chinese laundry, and they said, I'm not sure we can do it. And he said, I'll help you. They didn't let him help, but he stayed there and paced back and forth and went back in the back room to see how to get along. And he waited for the clothes and took them back to Moody so he'd have them in time to catch the plane. By the way, God used James M. Gray then to be the next president of Moody Bible Institute and to be the dean of American Bible teachers in his day. Neighbor, hear me. By the way, if I were going to name 12 of the greatest men alive today, and I'm no great judge now, but if I were going to name 12 of the greatest men alive today, J.R. Faulkner would be one of the men. He'd be one of them. I remember the time when J.R. Faulkner was at Tennessee Temple, Highland Park Baptist Church in Tennessee Temple. And I remember when he was a young man who was a man of all works. He did everything from seeing that the building was prepared for conferences, janitor work, anything in the world and everything in the world to be done. J.R. Faulkner. I remember the time there was another man who worked here at the same time he did, and both of them worked for the church. And later on, the other man left, asked me for revival. I went to be with him. After that revival, I told him I would never be with him again. But I remember him saying to me, well, J.R. can be a flunky if he wants to, but not me. If I'm going to build a church, I'm going to build one for myself, not for Lee Robertson. He never built one for himself or Lee Robertson either. J.R. Faulkner is president of Tennessee Temple Schools, co-pastor of this great church, one of the great ministries in all the history of gospel work from the time of Christ. Who's Elisha? The heir, evidently of wealth, who left it and became the man who washed the hands of Elijah. Good neighbors, both God and man respects the man who says, I'll give of myself. On the Bill Rice Ranch, we have right this minute, I believe it's 93 horses. I'm not sure. We've sold about 30 this winter. And this doesn't include the new colt crop. I don't know how many colts have been born, but we have, I think, 93 horses right this minute. We have some Appaloosa horses. Appaloosa horses are horses that have peculiar little spots. They sometimes have a blanket on the rump with little spots inside that blanket. Sometimes that's the only spot on their body is there's a blanket of different color than their body color and the spots. Appaloosas. Now and then you get an Appaloosa horse that'll have a spot that'll look like the palm of a hand on that horse. Nez Perce Indians treasured Appaloosa horses, and they kept the strain going. And they tell a legend about the handprint on the Appaloosa. It's just a legend, I'm sure, but the Nez Perce had been at peace with other tribes for some time, and they were in a valley. Hunting was good, grass was good, buffalo, deer. The only enemies they had was a tribe that was far away, and as far as they knew they were at peace. The boys in the village would take turns grazing the herd of Appaloosa horses. One day it was a time for the chief's little son. And he and a little friend, boys probably 12 years old, drove with a herd of horses to the valley where they'd graze. The two boys were to watch the horses and not let them wander. That was their main job. And the boys would talk and they'd play as they watched the horses. But a war party, a hunting party from another tribe that was at enmity with the Nez Perce stumbled upon the valley. And they saw the horses and they couldn't believe it. The horses were guarded by just two little boys. The Indian warriors crept up. One of the horses suddenly smelled or heard one of the braves, and he whistled, and the boys jumped. And there they saw these men coming to them through the grasses. The boys ran. A volley of arrows came, and one boy was killed instantly. The little son of the chief ran to his horse, jumped on the horse's back, yanked him around, turned him toward the village down the valley, and as he did, a warrior drew back an arrow in his bow and fired, and the arrow went through the body of the little boy. He leaned over his horse's neck, holding on to the mane, struggling to keep conscious. He knew he was badly hurt, of course. He was deathly sick and dizzying, and everything was dark, and he held, and he cried to the horse, and the horse went like the wind. And the little boy put his hands on each side of the horse's neck And the horse went down the valley and plunged into the village and stopped at the council fire. The ashes were cold. And the little boy tumbled to the ground. He never got to tell them to warn his people. And they came and looked at his horse. And on each side of the horse's neck, there were bloody handprints pointing down. The little boy tried to hold on. From that day, many a warrior going into that battle would paint a red handprint pointing down, meaning, if it takes my life, I'll give it for my people. And the Appaloosa horses with the handprint are greatly treasured. If it takes my life, I'll give it for my people. And the Appaloosa horses with the handprint are greatly treasured. I was with Dr. Paisley in North Ireland. I saw a red handprint on their coat of arms of the Irish Republic of North Ireland, the Free State. And a man told me that handprint, Dr. Paisley gave me a little necktie that's got little red handprints all over it. You'll see the red hand of Ulster. Many years ago, 2 tribes wanted this beautiful place. And they drew up in battle and finally met. Somebody said, wait, let's just, this way a great number of men will be killed. Let's settle this some other way. Each man had a sailing boat. Each one had a captain that they were proud of. They decided these 2 ships would go out into the sea and race back for the shore. One man had a young captain. He was fine, but he was untried, not an experienced man. The other, an old warrior who had sailed the seas many a year. But the 2 ships went out and they turned back toward the shore. It was agreed the first captain who touches dry land, he will claim this land for his chief, for his king. The 2 ships came and they were almost neck and neck, and then at the last moment, the wily older man, experienced, maneuvered his ship in such a way it cut the wind from the sails of the other man, and his ship ran aground. His men cheered. The captain went down the ladder into the water. He'd wade on ashore. The other captain, a young man with flaming red hair and beard, stood. No way in the world he could get out off his ship and he could be to dry ground before his rival. He jumped to the deck, picked up a battle axe, ran to the prow of the boat, lifted the axe high, and men said, oh, he's going to kill his rival. No, he's not. He took his hand and he put it on the rail and took that axe and cut it off and picked a bloody red hand from the deck. And with all his might, he turned and threw it. It sailed up above the mast and the sails and hit the ground. First captain to touch the shore. And Ulster still reveres the memory of a man whose hand first touched Ulster. Elisha said, whatever it takes, I want what Elijah has. Stayed with him. They crossed the Jordan River because Elijah took his mantle and struck the waters, and they rolled back and the men walked over. God sent the chariot to divide the men. The whirlwind picked up Elijah. His mantle fell from his shoulders, and Elisha picked it up. He took his own clothing and rent them and went back to the Jordan and took the mantle of Elijah. And he said, all right, I want a double portion of his power. Let's see what happened. Oh, where is the Lord God of Elijah? And he struck the waters, and the waters obeyed him. and Elijah passed over. Elisha passed over. Elijah, there were, as I recall, 7 miracles recorded in the Bible that he performed. Elisha, 14. A double portion of my power. Elisha, what a man. You know, so great was God's love and respect for this man. A man who worked hard. A man who gave himself unstintingly. A man who was willing to help the other man in his ministry. Look, Elisha died. They buried him. Now in Palestine, I've seen this. They usually bury people where they don't need the ground for planting, so they pick out rocky places. And they will make a little hole in a rock 2 feet square, about that big a square. Right in. They take a man's body, cram his body in there, they seal it up. His son dies 30 years later. The first man, nothing left but just his bones. They take the body of the next man, cram him into the hole, seal it up with clay again. So they can have several generations in this one grave back in a rock. Elisha was buried. One day, a man had died. The mourners were taking him out for burial when suddenly, here somebody shouted, and here came the enemy. Run for your life! The pallbearers had the body of this man. What in the world? And here is a grave of some kind in this rock. They didn't know who was in there, didn't care. Boy, and they shoved this fellow in and they ran. They shoved this fellow in on top of the bones of Elisha. He came alive. God brought him to life. He hit the bones of Elisha. He lived again. The man came crawling out. I've often wondered. There was a war party, and I expect he yelled, "Hey, wait for me!" And here he ran. Good neighbor, both God and man respect the man who gives himself without stint, unselfishly. The man who says, I pray for my own ministry and I pray for the ministry of others and I'll help them. When it's time for me to wash the hands of Elijah, I'll do it. Yes, I will. Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who poured water on the hands of Elijah. But today, we remember Elisha, the man who had a double portion of the power of God on his life and on his ministry.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us.